Buddy. Hello, hello. Uh, my name is Lainey Rose, and I'm the events manager here at East City Bookshop. It is a joy to be with you all today. And thank you to our virtual audience for streaming in that way. We always have something on the calendar here, and our 2026 events are already in full swing. Later this month, we'll be hosting an event for All the World's Your Stage, a new children's book by the Folger Shakespeare Library director, Dr. Kieran Cooper, who seeks to make the world of Shakespeare accessible and interesting to young readers. All the information about upcoming events and our 14 different book clubs can be found on our website. Before we get to tonight's event, some housekeeping details. Number one, if you would take a moment to silence your cell phones, we would greatly appreciate it. Number two, if you need a restroom, it's upstairs past the cash registers and the greeting cards. Number three, we will have time for questions tonight for both in-person and virtual attendees. So even if you're watching via Zoom, you can participate. Please put those questions in the Q&A feature so that we can see them and can ask on your behalf. And finally, most importantly, if you still need to purchase a copy of tonight's book, we have those copies available and we'd be happy to help you out. All of those copies are upstairs at the register, not on the shelves, and can be purchased prior to the signing line. We are always delighted to host an event that has a local connection, and considering we can see the roof of the Library of the Congress from our front steps, we were incredibly eager to highlight such an important part of our community. Since 1925, the Library of Congress has presented one of the most prestigious and innovative concert series in the United States. Let the People Hear It, Concerts from the Library of Congress at 100, shares the history of this remarkable series through the people, music, and collections that have inspired countless listeners. Photographs, historical documents, and unique music manuscripts demonstrate how the concert series enriched and preserved America's musical, dance, and theater heritage, all while fostering a community of music lovers. A community that is here tonight, and we thank you for that. We are joined tonight by the authors who made this great book happen. Nicholas Brown Caceres is the acting chief of the Library of Congress's music division. He previously served in the senior leadership roles at the Prince George's County Memorial Library System and Washington Performing Arts, and he is a former Army bandsman. Dr. David Plylar is a music specialist and concert producer at the Library of Congress. He is also a composer and a pianist who writes about music. Now please join me in welcoming our authors of the evening. Come on out, gentlemen! And keep that applause going. Don't let it falter.
Thank you, everyone. So happy to see you all. Really appreciate the support. Some familiar faces and some new faces. So, and special thanks to ECD Bookshop for hosting us. This has been one of my personal favorite bookshops anywhere for a long time, and grateful for their making this space for our community available tonight.
Yeah, likewise. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having us.
Okay. And hello to everyone who's tuning in online. Sorry that we can't see you, but we really appreciate your being here. So tonight's story is one of magic happening in the United States government. And, the government has looked different over the years, but this has been a consistent through point of the way that the government makes the arts happen in a really meaningful and open and cheerful and community-centered way. But on top of that, it has had an incredible historical impact on music, just in the United States, of course, but also far beyond, with international influence on the part of some of the great venues and presenters around the world. We're going to be doing this from a very kind of conversational storytelling perspective, but we want you to hear the origin story from the woman herself, Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge. So stand by for a nice audio clip.
After 7 years in Pittsfield, my chamber music festivals had grown to such proportions and seemed to me so important that I decided to perpetuate them by placing them under institutional management. Still another chance suggestion then led me to consider the Library of Congress as the most desirable, impersonal, and permanent administrator of my cherished project. Dear Carl Engel and the librarian, Mr. Herbert Putnam, proved deeply sympathetic and enormously helpful in bringing this about, and I was not only very glad to share an increasingly heavy responsibility, but also welcomed the opportunity to establish in the government a little wedge of authority in matters of art. I think I was even kindly accused of a little wangling, and perhaps justly, for I could wish for music the same governmental protection that is given to hygiene, education, or public welfare. How wonderful if we could have in the Cabinet a Secretary of Fine Arts. I feel that in the course of 26 years, my concerts have developed and guided my career as much as I have guided them. One idea has evolved another. One event has grown into another. I have followed their direction into paths at first entirely unforeseen, until today I find myself in your midst at this festival, feeling the radiation of friendship and beauty which chamber music broadcasts, as I feel the return messages, augmented 1,000-fold, which center in this little auditorium in the Library of Congress.
You have just heard a talk by Mrs. Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge, creator of the foundation named for her in the Library of Congress, where the 10th Festival of Chamber Music is now in progress.
It's always lovely to hear her voice, and she was a force of nature from everything that we can understand from the materials in her collection, which is at the library. But just the very short story of how she came to the library. Mrs. Coolidge was a musician herself. She also wrote some music, though she didn't consider herself a very serious composer. She had a series of tragedies where her father, then her husband, and mother all passed away within 18 months of each other. And she all of a sudden had to deal with all of the life changes that came with that. And Mrs. Coolidge ended up using her energy to support the cultivation of new art with commissioning living composers and supporting living composers even if she didn't like what they produced. And accompanying that effort with cultivating the important work that happens with reinterpreting the classics. So there's kind of two pillars to everything that she did. There was the propagating the classics, but also cultivating new work and supporting the living traditions and making sure that they would continue into the future. In the early 1920s, she had been hosting a chamber music festival in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where she built a concert hall called the South Mountain Concert Hall. It is still there and still presenting chamber music. It predated the Tanglewood Festival, which was originally known as the Berkshire Festival that the Boston Symphony put together with Koussevitzky. And it was at that festival that she started to interact with Carl Engel, who was an important music historian and publisher in the United States of European extraction. And at this point, he had become he had come to the Library of Congress and was in leadership, and later became the chief of the music division when she was hatching this plan with him. Mrs. Coolidge had been presenting concerts of chamber music around the United States and Europe for quite some time, sponsoring some actual string quartets to do tours all over the place, and had been commissioning music before she came to the library. But she was getting to the point in her life where she wanted to make sure that this was going to have legs beyond her time on this earth, and she wanted that institutional partner. She ended up connecting with Engel, and they started conniving in a very charming and positive way to think of how they could get the Library of Congress on board with this. The way I like to tell the story, which may or may not be apocryphal, is that basically Mrs. Coolidge was presenting these ideas that Engel would have to run up the flagpole in the library to the Librarian of Congress, who was Herbert Putnam at the time. Knowing how the bureaucratic resistance can happen sometimes, Putnam, of course, was not necessarily jumping on board immediately, but they were running with the idea because you don't say no to support, right? And this was a very far-fetched idea for a private citizen to give a government agency a giant pot of money to start to put on concerts. And because she had Engel as a champion internally, things started moving, and eventually she got the library to agree to present a test run of concerts. But the library didn't have a concert venue, so they talked about the Smithsonian, which had recently opened the Freer Galleries concert hall, to be the host, physical host of these initial concerts, which were presented in February of 1924. Mrs. Coolidge and Engel were very, very, very savvy. The guest list for these original chamber concerts was out of this world. The First Lady was invited, all of the major European diplomatic delegations, members of Congress, etc. And lo and behold, when these were all a success and made the library look really, really great, which was probably measured by the library by the press coverage and also the responses that they were getting from members of Congress who actually were writing in saying, "Hey, Mrs. Coolidge, I just had this amazing time. Thank you for including me." One of those people ended up being one of the sponsors of the legislation that in 1925, when it was passed in Congress and then signed into law, enabled the Library of Congress to accept Mrs. Coolidge's money to to construct and open the Coolidge Auditorium, and also to establish the Library of Congress Trust Fund Board, which was the mechanism they needed in order to accept private funds for philanthropic purposes. Up to that point, the library was not permitted legally to do that. So this small effort, which was actually a huge effort, that resulted from Mrs. Coolidge and Engel lobbying both leadership within the library and also Congress directly, resulted in this transformative thing that happened that in many ways is a secret to a lot of people who are outside of the music world, but it is a central part of the way that the Library of Congress at least has been a home of advancing the arts in the United States and beyond for over 100 years now, and it's a story that deserves to be told. So that's why we're here, and thank you for listening to us. So that's kind of laying the land for the outset of things. So we get now to January 1925, the first bit of legislation passed to start construction on the hall. The hall was actually fully built and opened by October of 1925, which is kind of insane, and construction didn't even start until the spring. And just a fun story that you'll see in the book, Mrs. Coolidge, to speed things up, sent in the check for $60,000 to build the hall before the legislation was passed and signed into law, and the library had to tell her, sorry, we can't cash your check. But she was really smart about how to push the bureaucracy, and things like that helped, even though they couldn't cash the check at the time. So where do we go from there? I'm going to kick it to David, who's going to tell us about the opening festival of chamber music concerts in 1925.
Yeah, so the very first set of concerts that happened were between October 28th and the 30th of 1925. And what's kind of what I find amazing about them is that from that very first, those very opening concerts, she had already, and Engel had already developed kind of those, as Nick called them, the pillars of what the concert series was going to be, with an emphasis on tradition and innovation, so that you have the old music and the new music kind of living together. And there's a great little story that I can give that's not in the book, but is related to it with the very first piece that's on the program. The very first work that was heard in the Coolidge Auditorium was by Bach, and it was on the organ. And it was a chorale prelude, and we didn't know which one it was, because he had about 6 or 7 different versions of this prelude that he had composed. It turns out that in the correspondence between Engel and Linwood Farnham, who was the first organist who played it, he was discussing, how this organ, which most people are surprised to hear that the Coolidge once had, was not installed yet. This was October 3rd, but it was expected to be installed by like October 19th or so, and so they think it should be plenty of time for October 28th's opening concert. And so Farnham is all about it. No problem, we'll do that. He was also going to play a Handel organ concerto at the end of that first concert. And then it turns out that there were several other composers on that program who were interested. Charles Loeffler was a composer that Mrs. Coolidge had known for some time and was very interested in and had commissioned. And we have a number of his things there. And she commissioned a new work on the Canticle of the Sun that was premiered. And he found out about this organ business and thought, wow, that would be a nice thing to be able to include in my piece. Again, very close to when it was actually going to start. So together, they had to figure out what the piece begins in a low G sharp. So they had to find a prelude in A flat, or at least transpose it to that. And they ended up finding one. And because of that, they actually developed an overarching theme for the first part of that concert. So it went with the Bach, then there was the Loeffler, and then there was a piece by Frederick Stock, who was actually the conductor of that night. And so there was one piece bled into another, and it was highly regarded. It was a very successful opening gambit on behalf of Coolidge and Engel. And from then on, there was 3 days of a wide variety of music. The South Mountain String Quartet was one of the first, I think was the first quartet that was performed there. They did some Beethoven, and so you heard some stuff like that. You had an English choral group that was pretty famous that came through. They had a lot of big names like Nathan Firestone and others who played in those first concerts. And from it went from there, and so it was kind of a nice initial festival that we've tried to live up to over the next century of planning and stuff like that to kind of recognize the importance of what came before us, but then also to honor that, and then also try to move forward so that we can introduce people to new things as well.
So one thing about the structure of the book is that it is really intended to, it's organized so that you can get the highlights of the major moments in the history, with also some examples of the different thematic threads happening, the trajectory of the philanthropy that's happened, the way that the programming has expanded over the years. So it's organized with a prologue, which is basically the origin story. Then we have our Act 1, which is talking all about the performers and the composers who have become synonymous with our concert series, talking about these early years of setting the tone for the programming, looking at the tradition of residencies, which David will speak on in a second, and then also the way that the collections are front and center with all of the programming and all of the way that we present the content for the public to enjoy. And then in Act 2, we talk about the way that the concert series reaches beyond the physical space, reaches into the radio broadcast land, and of course digital now, and then has also expanded to broaden the community through philanthropic engagement, and programmatically expanded to include dance and theater as our collections in the music division, which actually is responsible for music, theater, and dance archives, how that collecting program has been reflected in the concert series. And then there's a nice thing at the end that looks back at a speech that Carl Engel wrote for a tribute to Herbert Putnam when he was retiring from service, where he actually looked forward to 2025 and came up with what his vision was of how the concert series would evolve over 100 years. And if we have time at the end, we'll give you a little glimpse of that speech. But residencies are up next.
Yeah, sure. This is skipping ahead a bit, and also introducing a new character, Gertrude Clark Whittall, who was another one of the foundational donors of the music division in the Library of Congress. She's the one who gave the library 5 Stradivari instruments, and those have become the central core of our string program at the library, and have been one of her conditions was that she wanted them played, but they also can't leave the Library of Congress, so it makes it a little bit difficult to do that in some ways. So because of this is how the residencies kind of evolved naturally out of this. We wanted to have high quality string quartets playing these groups with playing these instruments and getting to know them, because it can be quite difficult to just understand their idiosyncrasies if it's your first time playing the instruments. And so our first major residency started in 1940 with the Budapest Quartet, and they were there for a remarkable 22 years until 1962, and had played actually at the library prior to 1940, and that was it was a great chance for those the music, the instruments to get played, and also for them to explore other kinds of music that were coming into being at the time, and commissioned by both Coolidge and acquired by Whittall in different ways. Then we had the Juilliard Quartet came in, and they came from 1962 to, I think it was 2003 or 2002. I'm not sure exactly when offhand. I'm forgetting at the moment, but they came in 1960. And they were here for forever, and so they were kind of they were called America's Quartet by some, and they were seen as kind of the epitome of chamber music performance. And they also were some of these Budapest and Juilliard quartets were the ones that people heard on the radio, and so they became very important in that regard in terms of just educating the American public about what this music is and what they could experience for free at the Library of Congress should they come to town. Another major ensemble that came to have a long-term residency in 1982, I think, was the Beaux-Arts Trio. And they technically had been with Menahem Pressler, the pianist, with them the entire time. They had technically performed there, I think, for the first time in 1958, and for the last time in 2008. So they had a full 50-year period that they were, performing in some capacity at the Library of Congress, and that was another fund that kind of came into being to support specifically the Beaux-Arts Trio. And this might be a good thing that I'll hand it off to Nick here to say maybe a few words about these other funds that sort of came into being. It just seems like a good segue.
Sure. Yep. So after Mrs. Coolidge established her legacy with the library, and she was very much a living part of that legacy until she passed in the 1950s, and she was consulting on programming and had a lively back and forth with the chiefs of the music division, and made her displeasure with one of them quite known to the Librarian of Congress. It wasn't Engel, it was one of the later ones, and fascinating correspondence to look through in the collections. But what happened with this legacy that Mrs. Coolidge established was the music world and the philanthropic community here in DC in particular saw this shining example of how someone put their stamp on basically American government in a way that was really reflective of their own personal values in an inclusive way for the arts community, and they wanted to participate. And philanthropy was a very different beast at the time. It wasn't as open to everyone's participation, and we also have to keep in mind that this is a moment in history where women's suffrage had just happened, and it's an ongoing battle, of course, but these original figures in the important founding of the concert series at the library were all women, and it's just an important thing to note, and to realize how these important figures had so much agency in a time when the system was so, even more than it is now, set up against them in terms of their having influence. So building on Mrs. Coolidge's legacy, again, this is my way of telling the story. Mrs. Woodall wanted to make her own mark on the story, and so there were the original 4 strads that she donated. Then she added a 5th. She built the Whitall Pavilion right next door to the Coolidge Auditorium, and also built the courtyard, which has a lovely fountain, and you can see some composer names on the outside of the building there. And that space was built specifically to house the strads and make them accessible to the public through display. And the displays have looked very different over the years, but at one point they were in giant glass cases in the middle of the room, and now they're in display cases on the wall that survived the earthquake of 2011 quite well, which is great. So we're going to stay with what works and make sure that it's updated as needed. And she also ended up making major contributions to our collections with music manuscripts and correspondence. That we have a particular range in our music manuscript vault where it's literally dozens and dozens of manuscripts by people like Beethoven and Schubert and Mozart and Brahms and Schumann, and it's just mind-blowing. And Mrs. Woodall brought all of those to us basically through her philanthropic support. She also helped us acquire about half of Arnold Schoenberg's archive, and one of the roles of the concert series in this broader picture of what the Library of Congress does was that the concert series, and this is still true to this day, the concert series is a catalyst for building relationships with people who are existing and making things happen in the arts world. And once there's the opportunity to develop relationships with artists or composers or artist managers, we click with some people as an institution, and we see folks develop over time. And composer like John Adams, who we've commissioned multiple times throughout his career, recently worked with us to have his collection come to the Library of Congress, and he's one of the most well-known American composers of the last 100 years. And that happened with Schoenberg. Schoenberg was new to the United States. He was an emigre composer. He needed work, and it was a struggle for him to get the work because, of course, he's not the most pop culture accessible composer, but the Library of Congress is into what has an impact and staying power, and he received multiple commissions from the Library of Congress, and then Mrs. Woodall's role with helping the library work with Schoenberg was in providing the funds to get some of his manuscripts and his papers to us. So we'll take a brief pause from our yakking so that you can hear from Mrs. Woodall herself. If you were at our Strad concerts recently, you've already heard this clip, but if you were not, stay tuned for a really exciting moment here.
To all unseen friends who are listening in tonight, we welcome you. We are brought together by the universal bond of the love of music. This collection of instruments that you will hear played upon this week were made by the great craftsman Antonio Stradivarius. I held them in trust for a short time. Now they belong to every one of you, for they were given to our government to hold and protect forever. In presenting these instruments to the Library of Congress, it was my aim to give to the people of this country an opportunity to see and hear these rare Stradivari. They can be viewed at the Library of Congress by anyone who wishes to do so. They can be heard in concerts held in the library and also through the medium of the radio by an even larger audience. If the appreciation and enjoyment of music in America will be advanced thereby, the purpose of my gift will have been fulfilled. As you already know, the festival being held this week is to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the death of Stradivari on December 18th. But it is not our intention to make you wait another century or two for a similar presentation. It is our hope that we shall be able to present a commemorative concert each year on December 18th, and that arrangements will be made whereby you can all hear it.
And that is true, and we have lived up to that commitment with Mrs. Woodall's vision, and we actually have the Strads used in performance far more than just those Stradivari concerts in December. If you would like to hear them live, we'll be having them performed in February on the 18th by violinist Benjamin Beilman, also February 20th by the Lancoro Quartet, so you'll get to hear four in action that night, and then violist Tabea Zimmerman, who, if you're into viola stuff, is about as good as it gets, so encourage you to check that out. If you're not into viola stuff, it's a Strad, it's cool, come on. But this really speaks to, it's one thing to put out a music manuscript, but it's another thing for a collection item to actually be brought to life. And we're so grateful for people like Mrs. Woodall, who saw the importance of having a custodian such as the Library of Congress involved in helping protect these instruments so that they would be accessible to the public. Because one of the things that we face with if we're ever considering acquiring more instruments is that the market for these instruments is incredibly complex, and in many cases there might be folks who are vying to acquire them for private collections that would take them out of circulation for the public's benefit unless they're going to be loaned to a performer for them to use, which does happen quite often. So anyways, nice taste of Mrs. Woodall there. The way that I've heard the story, and sorry for adding color commentary, but I find joy with that. Mrs. Woodall and Mrs. Coolidge they didn't necessarily get along the best, so they were seated in different parts of the hall, and kind of were, if you're ever at a party with someone that you don't want to talk to, you're orbiting in different parts of the room, and they did some of that, which is kind of cute. But they ended up basically starting this tradition of philanthropy at the Library of Congress that has led to over 40 gift and trust funds being established since the beginning of our series of beginning of our history with the concert series, and that portfolio of endowments now amounts to over $41 million, which is protected funding that has been given to the American people for the care of the library to put on these concerts and make sure that the collections can continue to grow and be served to the public. And with that, we probably should talk about commissions.
I was just going to bring that
Perfect.
up just to mention that one of the other great things about these philanthropists were their foresight was quite considerable, given that they were new to this whole venture. One of the Mrs. Coolidge was involved with commissioning from the very beginning, and many of our other ones, including Leonora Jackson McKim, who was basically commissioned all of our violin and piano music from the 1970 on. They had Mrs. Coolidge's example of requiring manuscripts to be given to the Library of Congress upon the completion of a commission. And so in this way, we've been able to acquire Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra, because that was a Koussevitzky commission. John Adams was mentioned earlier, Road Movies for it's kind of a famous violin and piano piece. We've got Britain's first string quartet. There's about 700 more. So I'm not going to try. I get too excited about it because there's so many. But what it creates is an atmosphere of where we can look at these works and have them on display if they're performed again, and it also creates that conversation with the composers who come or who are commissioned, and often leads to either, if not the full collection coming, a nice rapport that you can see the after effects in the rest of our collections. And so it's a really fun thing for programmers to do, to work with our collections to help to kind of augment, not our oral opportunities to hear these pieces, but also to be able to bring something to the physical as well.
One note, just to expand on the Serge Koussevitzky role a bit. Koussevitzky was the most impactful music director of the Boston Symphony. He was involved in founding the Tanglewood Festival. He was also really one of the main figures in American classical music in the 20th century who brought the whole notion of commissioning new music into the major symphony orchestra concert halls here in the United States. And he was responsible for things like that Concerto for Orchestra, Benjamin Britten's Peter Grimes opera, which is one of the most important operas ever. And I'm a Britten fan, so I am totally biased, but it is important. And many other works, including Aaron Copland's Third Symphony. And what Koussevitzky's foundation ended up doing was, it was originally an independent foundation, but it was folded into the library early in its history. And that facilitated these major works being commissioned and us receiving the manuscripts. And these are works that we can't necessarily present because they're typically orchestral works or large-scale works that do not fit into our hall. And it also is managed slightly differently than our other commissioning funds in that there is a board for the Koussevitzky Foundation, really important figures in the music business who work with the library staff to solicit applications from composers and ensembles, and we go through an adjudication process to pick who gets a commission, which is different than our main concert series commissioning funds, where the staff are curating that based on what our programmatic mandates are at any given moment. But it's interesting to just realize that in any given year, the Library of Congress might be commissioning sometimes 12 to 14 to 15 composers, and it's basically giving work to composers, but it's for the benefit of the art form and also for our collections. And the composers retain all the intellectual property rights, which is a really important aspect of this. And it's a pretty remarkable influence for a relatively humbly sized team that does this, and the impact is just wide-reaching, and there's a ripple effect that we can't even really begin to quantify.
Oh, absolutely.
And as an example of a commission that probably everyone knows about, and if you don't, you're going to know now, our most famous commission ever was Aaron Copland and Martha Graham's Appalachian Spring. It was not originally called that, of course. It was Ballet for Martha with some music, and then later on the two of them put their heads together and they came up with Martha Graham came up with the title of Appalachian Spring, drawn from a poem. But it was 1944. We were at war. There were temporary buildings all over the mall of government staff. The auditorium in the Coolidge Auditorium was filled with government officials, diplomats, senior military officers. We actually have the invitation cards and the RSVP cards from that night, which is really amazing. It was also Mrs. Coolidge's 80th birthday, and it was the Founders Day, which is traditionally marked on October 30th of each season or around there, depending on what the day of the week is. And here we are mounting this very, very important work that we didn't know at the time became a part of our cultural kind of identity as a nation, certainly from the music standpoint. There's so many more stories about that work and other commissions with Martha Graham that you can check out in the book. This was only one of our several commissions of the Martha Graham Dance Company. We've presented them again over the years, including in 2016, I believe it was, and commissioned a new work for them at that time. And it's been a really important relationship over the decades that has included us acquiring Martha Graham's papers, the papers of people like Eric Hawkins, who was the principal male dancer in her company for a long time, and many other people that have been a part of that orbit. And Martha Graham was very much the mother of modern contemporary dance in the United States. And here we are at Library of Congress making this all happen with Mrs. Coolidge's endowments, and the documentary evidence of this whole process is really fascinating, and I highly recommend coming to spend some time at the library to check that out. But just to give us some happy listening, we have a little clip for you here. is from the first recording of the original version, which is for 13 instruments with Copland conducting himself. There's so much about that moment that shaped so many other things that happen after the fact that it truly is one of the most important moments in the Library of Congress's role in American cultural history is that night in 1944 and everything that led up to it and things that happened afterwards. The amazing thing about our presenting with dance, though, is that it does go back to the 1920s, in fact, and there were early presentations of dance back then. We had some really important dancers and choreographers who were presented at the Library of Congress in really unique programs where it was very driven by the repertoire, either from the mix of the two pillars that we talked about before, or these new works. And other folks that were commissioned for the Graham Company, composer-wise, were Chavez, Hindemith, and Samuel Barber, and those have all turned out to be major repertoire staples in music for contemporary dance that's come out of the United States in the last 100 years. And the Graham Company does perform those original productions, many of which have set designs by Isamu Noguchi, all over the world, all the time, which is really cool. And just to kind of bring that forward a little bit on the commissioning front, in 2016, when we presented them, we commissioned a new work from the choreographer Pontus Lidberg, who's a Swedish choreographer and dancer, and it ended up turning into a really beautiful work called Woodland, which used the music of Irving Fine, who was a friend and contemporaries of Copland's. He was at the premiere of Appalachian Spring. He brought Copland to the faculty at Brandeis, and all these kind of ripple effect things happen. But the library commissioned Fine a couple times, and in the Coolidge Foundation correspondence, you can see him developing a relationship with Mrs. Coolidge and the library with this relationship with Copland, and it's really, really fascinating. And we mentioned Fine in particular with the book project because Fine's wife, Verna Fine, set up an endowment to support the library's work in promoting American music, and that endowment helped support this book project, which is really, really neat. So I know we're approaching the back half of our experience here, and do you want to take it away for a little bit?
I'm sure. I mean, I was just going to say that maybe one of the things that we should hit. I mean, there's so many. First of all, there's so many great performers that we're not mentioning right now who have appeared at the library over many years. One, there's the famous Bartók and Szigeti performance in 1940 that has a lot of stories about that you could read about in the book. But one thing that I was excited, just to share something that I was excited about learning as I came to know and be, just bowled over by the quality of what was happening. Alfred, it wasn't the first time that Szigeti had played at the library when he played with Bartók. He played with Alfred Cortot in 1926, and they played the Kreutzer Sonata and other things like that. And so you have one of the great pianists of the 20th century playing with one of the great violinists of the 20th century in the second year, which also included Wanda Landowska and figures like that, who also we have now two of her harpsichord instruments and whatnot. But I'm getting off on what I was meant to say, which is that over time our programming expanded, and we've sort of have a mantra of we keep what we do well, we keep that going. But it's really important to augment that, especially when there's such proliferation of other types of music that are coming out. And so one of the first other genres than classical chamber music to really get some attention was jazz. And in fact, there was an early performance by Nathaniel Shilkret and his orchestra, I think this was in 1928, of some staple works of I think W.C. Handy and others, but it came to be the 90s when we started to have more jazz featured, and then we skipped ahead. At that time we actually commissioned Cecil Taylor to do an Algonquin, a piece for violin and piano. That was by the McKim Fund, commissioned that one. And then we also had Max Roach the fall of 1999, and that was quite something. But it really wasn't until the 2010s that we had another major funder come to specifically address jazz. Do you want to say?
Sure.
I know we're running out of time.
Yep. So our second to last closing thought before we go to Q&A is this notion of expanding. But one of our opportunities with our need to expand is that the funding that we've developed over the years is so hyper-specific in most cases that it doesn't necessarily give us the full flexibility that we need in order to expand the profile of the programming. So we're very fortunate in the mid-2010s to start working with a longtime attendee of our concerts, Dan Logan, who generously supported establishing regular jazz programming with the library. And basically since 2015 or so, Dan, through his various foundations, has helped us have a regular presence of jazz on our concert series, where every season we're doing typically 4 to 6 or more jazz concerts, in addition to what we're doing in other genres. And the way that we're presenting jazz is very similar to the way that we present classical chamber music, in that we want the masters, we want the emerging artists, we want the great works that will resonate with any audience member. Then we also want to make sure that the music that might be a little more esoteric but is important to document on behalf of everyone has some airtime. One of the really cool important commissions we've had on the jazz side was by Maria Schneider with her band, and this work was called Data Lords, and the work was inspired by things that were happening with music copyright and the rights of musicians and composers, and that I think ended up getting did that get a Grammy nomination?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've had various commissions get Grammy nominations and also Grammy awards. The Jennifer Higdon Viola Concerto got 2 Grammy awards for its debut recording. And the jazz programming has become really, really interesting. This season we have Stanley Clark, who's of course a wonderful NEA jazz master, Elian Canizales, who is a Latin jazz artist who's emerging, and we also have a homegrown jazz talent, Akep Nikwele, who we first came to know, talking about relationship building, when she was a featured vocalist on our Billy Strayhorn big band concert in 2023, which celebrated the Billy Strayhorn papers coming to the library several years prior. And here we had this opportunity. We were surprised and heard this amazing artist, and we said, okay, this is someone we're going to follow. We're going to bring them back. And that happens all the time with our programming. And it's a really lovely, natural, organic thing that happens. So I know we have to switch to Q&A. And I'll save our final closing thought for the real end. But we'd love to invite your questions. If you have comments or special anecdotes about experience in the concert series, we'll also hopefully get some questions from our online viewers. There are so many more stories in the book, and we have so many more stories that we love individually and would like to tell. And also would like to recognize Dr. Paul Sommerfeld, who's here, who's one of our colleagues, a senior music reference specialist, who contributed one of the breakouts in the book. And we have various colleagues who are featured in the book with talking about their different expertises. So thank you, Paul, for being here. We appreciate that. So any questions? Yes.
I just have to say that as somebody who's not a musician, who's not really versed in this whole genre, to sit in that room, the Coolidge Auditorium, and listen to that audience of 400 people just explode at the end of a concert because it has been so good is just a delight.
Well, thank you.
It's just a delight. But I do have a question in the book. Who is your graphic artist? Who did the graphics for the book? Because it's so much fun, and I love the colors paging through.
Yeah. So the first part of the comment and then question was talking about the experience of how the audience reacts at the end of the concert and how it's such a special experience, where I think it is, from my perspective, is a unique audience experience. For one, just because we're able to see manuscripts and treasures related to the program, which kind of heightens the experience to begin with. The acoustics of the hall are ideal for almost everything that we present, except for amplified stuff where it gets a little complicated. But there's something about the people that come together to hear music there. There's always newcomers. There's people who've been there for 50 years who used to come with their parents, who have met their spouses in our hall. No joke. Read the book. You'll hear about it. And I don't know. There's something that's special about that space and how we all come together to experience music. For the second part, there was a question about who designed the book, and we're happy to give a plug for our colleague Cindy, who is one of the library's graphic designers, who's worked with us for a long time. And so this is part of a series of books called the Collection Close-Up series, and this is the third publication in that series. And each of the books has its own kind of vibe and color palette, but there's a consistent kind of aesthetic to each of them, and we worked with Cindy to pick out the colors. And one of the things that was really difficult with the process of the visual look of the book was that copyright makes it very complicated to have things that are in color in the book, because we had to license everything and we had limited budget and time to do that. The other part of it is the archival collections that we have. There's more available for the there's more readily available materials from the collections that represent the first half of the 20th century. So the Coolidge Foundation collection is a massive part of what we needed to rely upon in the collection. And we're looking then at black and white photos, we're looking at correspondence. That's not going to be the most colorful and that kind of thing. But what was really cool about the process was this book was that we were able to find ways to work color in throughout, and the color scheme helped us with that. And I think the cover is a really nice example of how those different time periods can come together, where the history is central, but also this kind of dynamicism, if that's a word, I don't know, jumps out at us from the page. And that is that experience of being in the hall. It's that same kind of energy, I think. Thanks for noting it. Any other questions? Yes.
More like an anecdote.
Sure.
It's directly related to this. And if this isn't in your book, it should be. In my opinion, 2013, I found out that one of my favorite performers in the world was going to be performing at the Coolidge, Audra McDonald. She was going to be performing on October 3rd, I think.
Yeah.
It's in the book? Well, I'll tell you the rest of the story. Anyway, so I immediately got tickets. I invited my brother, who lives in New York, to come down because he's a fan of hers as well. And we were all ready to see the show. Then September 30th came around, and it was when the government closed down. So the concert, we assumed, was canceled. Well, a couple months later, actually the next year, I got an email that said, your tickets are still valid, and she'll be performing in February. Get to the theater, get to the auditorium. She gets introduced. She comes out on stage. Gets a wild applause from the audience, and then when it calms down, she says, "Where have you all been? I've been waiting back there for you this whole time."
Yes, and thank you for bringing some of our realities into the room. So David and I started as concert producers in the music division in 2012, and in 2013 we were low on the totem pole trying to survive in that shutdown, which was really scary. And we had several concerts that were impacted, and we lived through that again this past year, of course, where we had 9 concerts impacted by the shutdown, given how long it was. We've now had the first-hand experience with colleagues of the last 2 longest shutdowns in history that impacted Library of Congress, at least, because the other one that was just executive branch didn't impact us.
One thing I'd also mention is that this last shutdown, we had planned to start the main part of the season with a redo of that Bach chorale that I mentioned earlier. This was with Simona Dinnerstein and Barocklin. But they're coming back in May, so we're going to pretend like that's we'll bookend it somehow to make it seem like it's a very natural fit. But she's going to play that for us as part of the concert.
Thank you for sharing that. Other questions? Okay.
This is a virtual question. As you write in the book, the Library of Congress's concerts have created great opportunities for cultural diplomacy and the use of the U.S.'s soft power. Is there a particular concert or moment that stands out as an important and memorable example of this?
Thank you to our online viewer for that question. Do you want to start on that one?
I'll start while Nick comes up with something specific by just saying that, I think that we've often worked with different embassies, and there's an element of I can only speak from my experience on that front, and there's always an element of kind of sharing in the process that allows all of us to kind of grow from it, both from a cultural perspective and from a personal one, an artistic one. And so there's always these. It's not just about networking and things like that. It's about like having a genuine interaction with something of cultural significance that is being put out there by an artist. And so that's my general thing to say.
Thank you for buying me time, Dave. I appreciate it. So there's kind of two strands to the work with cultural diplomacy, and I will say that historically it's been very much driven by the music division in terms of what happens in the concert series. And then there's stuff that happens that the librarian's office directs that we contribute to. So there's kind of the two strands. The topic in this area that totally blew me away, that I could not believe, I didn't even know about until we started working on this book, was that beginning in 1958 and through the early 80s, the music division had a huge role in co-presenting what was called the Inter-American Music Festival. And this was several different organizations coming together, DC cultural organizations, the OAS, etc., the library, but really the chief of the music division was one of the main instigators of all of this. But sometimes in Washington, there are things you can't just do on your own under your own name, but still want to contribute to, and this was what they were doing. Amazing fact of this from the get-go was that the First Lady of the United States was always the honorary patron or chair of this festival, which means right off the bat that we're on a different level in terms of influence, impact, visibility. And that continued into the 80s. But what was, I think, really special about this festival as it played out over the years, if we think about the way that the United States has had a very active role in trying to influence how things are going in Latin America to the present moment, through all of these presidential administrations, for these cultural organizations to be coming together with political organizations and diplomatic entities to elevate the music coming out of the countries in Latin America in Washington was a huge deal. This is a research area that is ripe for a lot of work. I hope scholars come and do this. Otherwise, when I get tired of doing bureaucracy, I'm going to do this myself. But investigating, like, why were these composers selected in this year representing these countries, and who was left out on purpose because of whatever was going on politically. And there's countless stories like that, and how that played out with this festival in the history of the library. Why are we working closely with the UK in one year, for example? Why are we not doing X, Y, or Z? Why do you see this push with Latin America at this time, but not this emphasis in other times? So it's a really interesting area for research. And then, of course, there were American composers like Aaron Copland who were really involved in the whole good neighbor policy influence of U.S. composers going to Latin America, who were also elevated in this festival. So really interesting topic. There's another example in the book where, I think it was in 2013, there was a really interesting multidisciplinary celebration of Mexico that our wonderful colleague Maria Rana curated, and that we contributed from the music division with performance by the Cuarteto Latinoamericano, which recently is ending their kind of multi-decade career, which is interesting. But these things happen. From our perspective in the music division, we have a responsibility as the National Library to participate in the conversation of cultural exchange, and you'll see that with like the American Folklife Center, with the way diasporic communities are represented in the arts. We do that from our perspective of classical chamber music, commissioning new music, dance, jazz, and while we are not trying to influence policy in any way, we're trying to highlight the connections and how working together strengthens the bonds between these nations. And one really nice example of this was very low stakes diplomatically, I would say, but when we had composer Oliver Nussin for a residency about 10 years ago, we worked with Birmingham Contemporary Music Group, which is one of the top contemporary music groups in the world, and it was their DC debut, which is pretty cool. But the Lord Mayor of Birmingham was so jazzed about this whole feature of BCMG that he came over and he wore his bling, and we involved the embassy, and it was really great. And sometimes it's just about celebrating things that we love, in this case music, together in the way that we're kind of fostering connection across these divides. So thank you for that question. It's a really interesting topic. Any other questions? Jeff? Yeah.
A comment and a question. The comment is the value of the manuscripts that you display outside, and the importance of your sponsoring the writing of music. It was really great to hear from one of the performers of one of your quartets, quintets, whatever, recently, I think it was this year, say, I was blown away by the fact that we are playing this piece, this special piece that was conceived by the library, and outside there you see the manuscript. It really had an impact on him. I thought that was impressive. You are custodians of lots of physical stuff, manuscripts in particular come to mind, but you're also the custodians of an amazing group of instruments. How are they handled maybe differently within the Library of Congress because of their unique value and their unique contribution to what you do?
Thank you for that question. Do you want to comment a little bit on that?
Well, just I think that there's different. Each one has different utility, and I say that trying to divorce myself from the assessment of their playability, because sometimes we want to preserve. We're more interested in preserving them than we are in doing something that might damage them. So there's different instruments have different sizes. We have the Dayton C. Miller collection, which is the largest collection of flutes in the world, and so some of those are playable. And in fact, there's the famous Lizzo example performing on one, and so there's those types of things. There's also, we have like a Buchla, not technically a synthesizer, but often called a synthesizer, the Buchla one that was used by Morton Subotnick to do Silver Apples of the Moon in one of the famous recordings. That has been restored now, and that is being used in different ways. It's being studied and used, and we're trying to actually use it potentially in performance. So, the kind of the terms of each instrument might be different. On the string side, you have the Stradivari instruments that Mrs. Woodall gave that cannot leave the building. But then we have other ones that can go out. There's the Vuillaume was used by Nurit in the NSO for many, many years. We have a Chrysler Del Gesù that can leave the library. We don't want it to leave the library that often, but there's each one has a different set of rules, and usually one of the things that's important up to determining what we can do with them also is what has been allocated for their maintenance. And that's one of the things that we look for with any new instrument, and Nick can speak more to this, but with any new instrument acquisition, we're trying to see where are we a museum, or are we going to be making these have a separate life on the stage? And so that's one of the things that comes to mind. But
yeah, and so the instruments are a unique area in the collections of the library as a whole, but in terms of kind of looking at them from an administrative perspective, they're in a category that's among other top-tier things that the library takes care of. So there's a certain level of security protocols that are required. There's a certain level of conservation and preservation support that is involved, where the instruments are stored just as with manuscripts stored in climate-controlled spaces. However, once you get to that level of item, there's extra protocols and real-time monitoring 24/7 and emergency response teams if there's certain things that are happening. If the temperature goes up in the storage space like 3 degrees over the accepted range, like there's 24/7 response and police involved and all that kind of thing. But one of the great reasons to make sure an object of that caliber comes to a place like the Library of Congress is that we're very fortunate to be among the best resourced cultural heritage institutions in the world, where we have all of that support in-house. And aside from Fort Knox, there's not going to be a safer place physically in terms of hoping everything goes smoothly. But Fort Knox is where the Magna Carta went during World War II, when we were holding it for the British and we had to make moves because DC is DC. And there's really complex protocols involved in support across the board. So it's a big part of the instrument curator's job and my job to make sure that those are taken care of. And then the concert producers are specially trained to help with the care of those instruments as well. I know we're at the end, and this has been a lovely conversation. We're going to have Lainey Rose come up in a second to close us out, but just want to share with you, as I promised, a quote from Carl Engel's remarks, Concert AD 2025 in the Library of Congress, written in 1929. And this is just an excerpt here. Quote, "If, without abdicating our right of choice, we revert tonight to a bygone custom, the reason is that exactly 100 years have passed since the first concerts were given in this little hall. They formed a departure. They inaugurated a new era in the development of our National Library. I shall not recite the many and varied causes that have contributed to this development, inspiring as their recital would be. Their effect is patent to all. This venerable building was but the first rampart in what is now a mighty citadel of the written and printed page. With the aid of a forward-looking with the aid of forward-looking and generous citizens, our government has been enabled to rear an unparalleled establishment for the propagation of art and learning. Thank you for being interested in this story. It's a story that only exists because of all of you. I know many of you have come to our concerts and supported this work. Would like to give another shout out to someone very special who's here with us, Roswell Encina, who along with Dr. Carla Hayden helped support this project and got it over the hurdles that existed. And we also dedicated this book to our former chief, Susan Vita, who sadly passed away this past summer, but she presided over 20 years of the concert series history and is the reason why we both are even there. So thank you all for listening. We appreciate it, and thank you to eCity Books for hosting us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our virtual audience for joining us as well. Another